I always kind of like to start the show with like a topic that revolves around the guest. And, you have done more quarterback research than literally anybody in the game. I mean, you posted an ebook originally. It's kind of how you got started back in 2011. Is it crazy to think about that? Like,
it's wild. I don't want to think about it, man. I don't want to think about it.
I wrote the Konami Code article in 2013 at Number Fire, and it's like, man, 2013, what the hell? Yeah. But you've done a really good job of kind of the recalibrating how to handle the quarterback position in the NFL. And this year, again, we're seeing that like these top front end quarterbacks still are providing this positional leverage over the field. It's not so much just Josh Allen. He's been kind of run down by Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes, but you look at the top 7 quarterbacks in ADP, and the reason I use top 7 is because I think it's fair to include Burrow as like a front end QB1 starter from like a perception stance coming into the season. And then after him, it's like then Brady, Rodgers, like Russell Wilson. And I think that it's clear, like it's fair to include Joe Burrow in that top 7 quarterbacks in ADP as being like a tier of itself. And so far right now, those guys have accounted for 40% of all QB1 scoring weeks this season, 49% of all top 6 scoring weeks this season, 64% of all top 3 scoring weeks this season. And of the 13 weeks this year, those guys have 9 of the weeks that have paced outright quarterback position. So when you look at kind of how the quarterback position is for fantasy, is there still more adjustment to be made on like getting one of these really good quarterbacks? Is it like a late round QB tier 1 game? Like, how do you think that the position is changing and how we're going to approach it going into this next season moving forward?
Yeah. So, it's kind of funny. I like handcuffed myself by being the late round QB guy. And then, all this happens when realistically, I feel like this is the one thing, I have plenty of stuff wrong, but this is the one thing that I feel like I was ahead on with the way that the quarterback landscape was changing and shifting and stuff. It's basically like after around that Lamar Jackson season when he won MVP. But the bottom line is, historically, most top quarterback ADP has made sense. Like if you were drafting them in like the 3rd, maybe early 4th round, like if you're getting the QB1 in fantasy football. But now let's just look at Josh Allen in particular. We have this unicorn in Josh Allen, who seems like he's going to be the guy year in and year out. That's different from years past. Years past, we'd see some fluctuation there. Like if a guy was the QB1 who was giving you this massive edge, he didn't necessarily do that the next season and year over year. But Josh Allen is proving to at least be that guy. And I think that you could probably throw Mahomes in there to be that dude to some degree. And then maybe we see Jalen Hurts continue this post, 2022. But so I think that what's really changed and what's shifted and what we need to recognize and what we should have recognized, last few years is we have far more predictability at the quarterback position than we've ever had. And the reason for that is not only in this year in particular, not only are like the low end QB1s, high end QB2s just not giving you anything where like they are totally replaceable by streamers, but these guys are still, the higher end QB1s are giving you a good production overall. But what we've seen over the last few years is that you have great passers that are also now great rushers. And we didn't see that before. Back when you wrote the Konami Code article in 2013, we were talking about Tim Tebow and Terrell Pryor. and then, even Cam Newton, when Cam Newton was getting that cheat code with the rushing component to his game, it wasn't like he was like that great of a passer. I mean, he had that 2015 season, with Ted Ginn as his wide receiver 1, but it wasn't like, Newton was like lighting it up through the air the same way we see it from Josh Allen, the same way we see it from Jalen Hurts this year, that kind of stuff. So, I think it's just really, really important to recognize that, number one, this is a trend that's been happening. But number 2, the more data points that we have where, Josh Allen, or if we see this consistently from Jalen Hurts, the more data points we have from these guys, the more likely it is we're going to see them get drafted higher and higher. It just makes sense to do that. It's not so much that these guys are giving you like that dramatically better of an edge that they did historically. If you look at numbers from like the top 3 quarterbacks, top 2 quarterbacks versus a replacement level 1 from 2015, from 2016, from 2017, I'm looking at results here, right? So how they finished the season. The difference between those high-end quarterbacks and their replacement level player, not really that much different than what we see this year, what we're going to see this year, maybe a little bit more, they might look a little bit better, but overall the trend has been pretty consistent. The difference is the guys who are giving you that huge edge are the ones that we were drafting early in fantasy drafts. And it's all because of that dual threat ability and the way that they're able to throw the ball well and run the ball well. where we go from here. I mean, I think we're in a world where Josh Allen's going to be a second round pick in a lot of leagues next year, if not first round in a lot of casual leagues. But I think eventually we're going to get to a point. It didn't happen this year. There were some unfortunate injuries to like a guy like Trey Lance, who could have been a guy who popped and became like a top 5 option. But we're going to eventually get to the point where there are 11, 12 quarterbacks who are capable of giving you that QB1 season, which is where we were throughout the 2010s, right? From like 2012 to 2019 or so. Not only was the predictability not there, but we had a lot of guys who were just able to jump and become the top quarterback in fantasy football. One of the funniest things is if you look at 2015 and if you look at 2018 and you look at the R squared, the correlation between top 18 quarterbacks and how they perform by ADP and how they performed by the end of the season, there was zero correlation. In fact, in 2015, the bottom 9 quarterbacks versus the top 9 quarterbacks performed better than from an ADP standpoint. But you just aren't going to get that anymore. You're just not going to see that. So as a result of that, we have to draft these guys earlier because you're not going to find as easier of a time getting a late round quarterback who hits. I mean, there's going to be 1 or 2 every year, probably, just like we get at other positions. Justin Fields this year has been that guy, but it's just going to be a really, really hard thing to bank on year in and year out until we see that quarterback pool kind of fluff out a little bit.
Yeah, so I look at a lot of my rosters this year, and obviously it's in context of the season. And the best teams that I have are these teams where I got in on that frontier of quarterbacks and kind of rode that wave. So kind of if we all kind of know that and we're going to gear towards that, I mean, how high is too high still? Like, are you going to be looking to be the gamer that tries to get Josh Allen, or are you still going to be looking to try to just see how that tier plays out? Like wait for Josh Allen to come off the board and then try to play like the subsequent next couple guys.
Yeah, I'm probably going to approach it the same way I did this year, which is that way. It was I don't have that much Josh Allen on my fantasy rosters, but I have a ton of Jalen Hurts. I have Patrick Mahomes. I have these the guys where they came right after Allen, a round or 2 after Allen, and you were able to get a discount, but you felt comfortable with them potentially matching his production in some way. Started out a little bit rough, but like you said, these things have evened out a little bit, since about week 5 or so. And so I do think that approaching things in that way next year is going to make a lot of sense, because the other thing that people don't think about enough is when you're the first and we've talked about this a lot, but when you're the first team to draft a quarterback, you're running a risk of really devaluing that pick because you don't know for sure when the rest of your league is going to start gobbling up quarterbacks. Because hypothetically, let's say you get Josh Allen in the second round next year, and then no one drafts a quarterback until round 6 or 7, and someone gets Jalen Hurts or Patrick Mahomes in round 6. Well, you probably feel a little bit bad about that value that you got from Allen in the second round. So that's another thing to keep in mind when drafting these guys is knowing your league and knowing how teams typically draft. If a lot of teams are going to, like, if Justin Herbert and some of these more traditional pocket passers are being drafted in the second round and you get Josh Allen in the first round, then that's not that big of a deal. But when the pool gets stretched, if you can get these guys later, then that's when you can really devalue the position. But I do think approaching it similar to this year, next year is probably going to be the go-to play. It's just getting that second tier of guys if you want to call Josh Allen, his own tier of quarterback.
Yeah, I'm curious to see too, how we do that next tier, right? How do we handle that next tier? Do you still want to get in as like a guy that has a QB1 ADP and have like a cutoff, or do you look at guys like we can still play the archetype game, right? Like you can target a Trey Lance, you can target a Justin Fields who is outside of there. Tua was getting an influx of weapons, right? Like, there's a reason why he's kind of hitting. Like then Geno's the surprise, right? Like Geno's the out of nowhere guy this year. Because I do look at some of the decisions I made the past couple of years, and I found that when I go early on the next tier quarterbacks, I end up, just having a lot more fragility. That guy this year, listen, I was in on Russell Wilson, and my Russell Wilson teams have no longer had Russell Wilson for several weeks. Right. I have immediately moved on, and it's okay. I was able to bridge the gaps and get some good players that I've been able to make some things, circumvent some things and make those rosters work. You run into a guy like Tua or a guy like Fields, but do we want to invest in that tier? Do we want to pause on that tier at all anymore? When you look at the guys like Brady was there this year, Rodgers, it's probably unfair to say Dak Prescott because of the injury, but Matthew Stafford was in that tier this year? Like those guys were all very much trap plays. Is it going to be like the tight end situation where we miss out on one of those top tier guys? We kind of just hold?
Look, I'm personally not going to get a traditional pocket passer as my QB1 in a regular redraft league. I just don't think it's worth it. And it hasn't been worth it. You're going to miss out on Tom Brady's crazy year a couple years ago, or Aaron Rodgers MVP seasons, whatever. You're going to miss out on those years, but you're also, from a process standpoint, you're not going to get screwed year over year, because it's very easy to fall into then the Russell Wilson trap this year, which I did too. Like, I had Russell Wilson in a lot of spots too. But I do think that what you're describing as well with like a guy like Russ is that the reason we're not going to, or the reason we probably shouldn't see a guy like Allen or Hurts or Mahomes be first round picks in fantasy is because there is still a very clear replaceability factor going on at quarterback. You can still get players late every single year. That's the late round quarterbacks still technically exist. Like, we're still seeing, late round options emerge every single season. This year it's been Fields, and you mentioned Geno off the waiver wire, and Tua. So you have these like later round options that can still save you if you do take one of those guys. But I think just leaning into the archetype and going after the mobile guy and hope that the passing numbers are there. Because remember, you're the one who writes about this. I'm not saying remember to you. I'm just saying remember to who we're speaking to here. But remember the rushing component is more for floor rather than ceiling. The ceiling really comes when those guys can throw the ball too, right? So that's when, like, Justin Fields' best games this year, aside from when he just like rushes for 180 yards, but his best games this year are when he has a couple of touchdowns through the air. It's when he's actually doing something as a passer as well. So you're just kind of crossing your fingers that component can come, which is exactly why Trey Lance was on everyone's radars this year, because the rushing component was going to be there. And then we're seeing, Brock Purdy come in and have a decent game against Miami, because anyone can do well in that system, right? So hopefully Trey Lance will be able to do well in that system. So yeah, I still think it's focusing on that archetype and getting the mobile quarterback, and then, crossing your fingers that they can really bring it together as a passer.
Yeah, that all makes a ton of inherent sense, and it's fun to watch the evolution of it too. I mean, we love that. This is why two QB leagues have come on in such importance as well, to not just because there's viable players at the quarterback position, but that it also circumvents kind of that top tier, right? Like, it adds a different wrinkle, because do you try to get one of those guys in the first round, and then that allows like really good other players, skill position players, to go in the second round. I mean, Justin Jefferson in Superflex leagues was going in the second round this year in some leagues, Jamar Chase, those guys, because people want to get that front wave of quarterbacks. So yeah, definitely implore people to check out still adding a second quarterback position to their leagues, just to kind of make the quarterback position interesting and make it so it's just not, hey, if you don't have one of these guys, you really can't compete.